Clutch chess tournament in St. Louis. Four best chess players in the world competing against each other. Current world champion, 19-year-old Demaraja Gukesh from India, former world champion and possibly the best player of all time, Magnus Carlsen from Norway, second highest ranked player in the world, 5 times US champion Hikaru Nakamura, and third highest ranked player in the world, current US champion Fabiana Caruana. Let's take a look at the highlights of day 2, and please stick around till the end of the video, witnessing a beautiful endgame technique by Fabiano Caruana sacrificing a bishop to promote his pawn to a queen. But we start with the clash of two American titans, Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana. Nakamura is playing white, Fabiano Caruana has a better position because his pawn on d4 is very dangerous and could be a queen soon, and Caruana pushes that pawn to a square d3. Hikaru plays queen d2, blocking that pawn from moving forward, but that's actually a mistake because after bishop b3 that Caruana plays, the rook goes to a square c2, creating all sorts of problems for white. Nakamura prevents it with a rook c7. We have exchange of the rooks on c7, but Caruana has another rook, and it goes to an open e-file and ready to jump on a square e2. Nakamura plays king f1, but still rook e2, so king f1 didn't solve anything. Queen has to go away, it goes to b4, and after bishop c4, Caruana wins the game. Nakamura resigns because there is no defense from the next move d2, opening the diagonal for the bishop, and white would simply lose. For example, if white plays rook d1 in this position, there is the move d2, again opening this diagonal, and let's say if white do nothing, let's say play bishop b6, there is a beautiful checkmate, double check from the bishop and the rook, and that's a checkmate. And if white decides to check the opposing king, let's say king queen f8 check, there is simply queen g8, and same idea going forward with the pawn moving to be promoted to a queen. Next game I want to show you is the endgame, pawn endgame between Gukesh, the world champion, and Magnus Carlsen. This position is better for black. They have 7 pawns against 6, so they have an extra pawn, although they're doubled. But pawn endgames are considered one of the trickiest part of chess game. The most difficult part considered to be a rook endgame, but pawn endgames are also very tricky. The kings must go to the middle of the board, usually in endgames, and that's exactly what Magnus does. He plays king f7. Gukesh follows the suit, plays king f2, king f6, king e3, attacking the pawn on e4, king f5, protecting it, all logical, b4 from Gukesh, and a6 from Magnus. And this position is already pretty even. But white has only one good move here, and that move is pawn to a4 to prevent black to play b5. Why it's important? We'll find out very soon. Instead, Gukesh plays h4, and that's a mistake, and Magnus wins the game with the move b5. Why this is winning the move? Because after c5, c6, and g3, turns out that white ran out of moves with the pawns. And if they run out of moves with the pawns, they lose. e5 from Magnus, and here Gukesh resigned because after he takes the pawn on d5, king takes d5, e5, only one pawn move remains here for Gukesh, it's a3, but black has another pawn move, g6. And now all white pawns are stuck. g4 loses the pawn, a4 loses the pawn, so if the king goes back, black king goes to d4, and we can see quite easily that what happens here is e2 check, king e1, and here Black king can just go and collect all the pawns on the queen side of the board and easily win the game. Or if you calculate correctly, you can actually even play king e3 here, but you need to make sure that you calculate everything correctly, because white king does not have any moves, but that's not a stalemate because white still have pawn moves. And let's say if they play a4, b takes a4, then b5, for example, and after a3, and let's say b6, a2, b7, checkmate. Checkmate with after promotion of a pawn. So Magnus Carlsen showed his pawn game and pawn endgame technique. The next game is between Fabiano Caruana and Hikaru Nakamura again. This time Fabiano Caruana is playing white, and we have a knight and pawn endgame. And this position is pretty even. And Nakamura, who is playing black, is playing king d6. We have f4 from Caruana. King c5, attacking the knight. Knight jumps to d5, and this position is already lost for white. Fabiano Caruana was under time pressure here, and he made a critical mistake putting his knight on d5. The correct move was knight c2. Obviously, very complicated stuff, very difficult to, even for grandmasters, top grandmasters in the world, to calculate all this, especially with 8 seconds left on the clock. After knight d5, black's king is going into white's territory. King d2, knight c5, attacking the pawn on e4. Knight f6 protects the pawn, but after king d4, again, pawn on e4 is difficult or even impossible to protect. e5 seems to be the only move to protect the pawn, but immediately it loses because black can calculate everything here with the move knight e4 check. Check and kind of double attack on the knight. So you have to take the knight, king takes e4, king c3, king f3, and black king simply devours all these pawns, and black wins. So Nakamura showed his pawn endgame, knight pawn endgame technique here, and actually he played this game with 97% accuracy. So absolutely wonderful game by Nakamura. The next one I want to show you is Fabiano Caruana playing white against Magnus Carlsen. And we have this pretty crazy position on the board. Black, Magnus Carlsen playing black, they actually have 2 extra pawns here, 5 against 3, but white is winning. Bishop takes f4. Magnus grabs the bishop, but instead of grabbing the bishop back with the king, rook h7. Rook h7 for Caruana. And the idea here is that the next move, the threat is a rook f7 checkmate. And it's very difficult to protect from that checkmate, because let's say if black plays knight d6, protecting the square f7, there's a cute checkmate with the pawn e7 checkmate. Therefore, pretty much the only move for black in this position is what Carlsen played. It's knight g7. After that, we have a check from the rook on h8, king goes to e7, and a rook takes b8. And now white has an extra exchange. But it's still not easy to convert this position. They have to be very careful. Rook takes b2, rook takes b2, pawn takes b2. And now, if Caruana took the pawn on b2 with the rook, the game would probably end in a draw, because after bishop e5, attacking the rook will go away anywhere, let's say on b7. King would take the pawn on c6, on e6, and white simply do not have enough material to support the rook to win this game. Black have tons of material, actually a bishop and several pawns, and the game would end in a draw. Therefore, white have to be very careful here, and Caruana finds the best move in this position with 21 seconds left on the clock. Knight d5 check. And now after king d6, now if king takes the pawn on e6, it doesn't really change anything. Knight still takes the bishop on f4. And now black's hopes are only on those two connected pawns, but they're pretty dangerous. So white still have to be careful here. Magnus plays c3. And believe it or not, in this position, although white has an extra rook, only one move wins. So you can stop the video and see if you can find the winning move for white. But the idea here for black is if they play c2 with the next move, they win the game because there is no way to protect either of those pawns from promotion. So the winning move for white, and Caruana finds it, is knight e2. And now if black plays c2, rook takes b2, and the promotion square c1 is protected by the knight. Caruana won this game, very important game in the standings. And then he played Magnus again, and this time with black pieces. And again got to this position where the only person who can win this game is Caruana, who is playing black. He has two extra pawns, but Magnus still has all the chances to save this game. And let's take a look here. Obviously, those pawns are very dangerous. Bishop takes c4 doesn't work, because if bishop takes c4, knight takes c4, king takes c4, rook a4 check on a skewer, king d3, exchange of the rooks, and b2, and the pawn is promoted. So bishop c4 is not the solution. But basically, Magnus Carlsen had to understand that black's whole idea here is to play knight d1 and then promote the pawn. So knight d1 is the move that cannot be allowed by white. They can achieve it by moving the rook to e1, protecting the square d1, and they could achieve it by moving the bishop to e2, also protecting the square d1. Instead, Magnus plays with 36 seconds to go on the clock, he plays king c3, and that's actually a mistake, and the game is over because knight d1 check, king must move away to b4, and we have a rook c2. Now again, black still have to be very careful here. b2 seems like the move that they wanted to make all along, loses the game right away because bishop c4 check and double attack. White manages to take the rook with the next move and protect the pawn, protect the promotion square on b1 with the bishop. So rook c2 is the move that had to be made. Carlsen plays rook e1 attacking the knight. Here b2 was winning on the spot, because after rook takes e1, rook c1, and next move, pawn becomes a queen. Instead, Caruana, I don't know if he didn't find that move or he just wanted to be extra careful. He played knight b2, and here Magnus, in a losing position, decided that, well, he blundered the rook in one move. He played bishop h3 and ran into knight d3, double attack on the king and the rook. Black wins the rook and the game. And thus, Fabiana Caruana beat Magnus Carlsen twice in a row. In this particular game, Magnus Carlsen played at 73% accuracy. I'm not sure if you ever remember Magnus playing that poorly, but that was the case in this particular game. And last but not least, the game between world champion Gukesh and Fabiana Caruana. Pretty even position on the board. Gukesh takes the pawn on h5. Fabiana Caruana goes to counterattack, putting his rook on the second rank and threatening the bishop on d4. Bishop moves away, and b6. Caruana ignores the fact that white can take the pawn on g6. His main idea is to activate the bishop and attack the pawn on g2. In this position, Gukesh could take the pawn on g6, but he decided to move the pawn forward. And his idea is to play h7, check, and after king will go to h8, let's say bishop g5, bishop f6, that would be a checkmate. Checkmate, or you're going to promote the pawn h. And that's the idea, but that's too late. There is no enough time for that. Fabiano Caruana plays bishop b7. The pawn on g2 is under attack. Rook h2. King h7, blocking h pawn. Rook f1, rook f8, and white plays bishop g5. And losing on a spot. Because after exchange of the rooks, black takes the pawn on a2, and already have an extra pawn, plus those are doubled. Pawn on h6 is not dangerous at all because it's blocked by the king. Gukesh tries to attack black pawn chain with bishop d8 attacking the pawn on c7, but simply c5. Bishop c7 attacking the pawn on d6. Fabiano ignores that threat completely and plays a5. Rook h4, g5, rook g4, and here comes calculation. Pretty easy for grandmasters, but still pretty impressive move. A rook takes g2, sacrificing an exchange. A rook takes, actually a piece, the whole piece. But Gukesh resigned, and he resigned because after he takes the rook, bishop takes on g2, king takes g2, we have a4, and it turns out that white have an extra bishop, but there is no way that bishop can stop the pawn from promoting. And the king is obviously too far away. And the reason this bishop cannot stop this pawn is because of this pawn on c3. It just blocks white's bishop. So let's say bishop takes d6, a3, and there is no way to get to a square a1. So Fabiano Caruana won this game with a beautiful move. Rook takes g2. And here are the standings after day 2. The tournament has a peculiar scoring system. The points scored in day 2 are doubled, and points in day 3 will be tripled. This scoring system allows comebacks even if a player is far behind. Magnus Carlsen is currently leading with 11.5 points. Caruana is a point behind, and Nakamura and Gukesh are way behind. But again, with 3 points for a win tomorrow, and 6 more games for each participant, everything can change. What do you think about the scoring system? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe. It would be really great if you do that. Thank you for watching.